Afternoon and welcome to the webinar. David Cole's with me as Director of Planning and Performance. The first thing to do is just to check you can hear us. So a few of you could just write and let us know that it's coming through okay before we get going. Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. That's really appreciated. Thanks. So thanks very much for joining the webinar. This is one of 3 webinars about one professional service. What we found worked really well, we did one on Friday, and we found that colleagues asked questions as we went along. So just type in any questions as we're talking, and we'll try and answer those questions so we can have a dialogue as we go through. Just so you know, I need to leave at about 1:20 because it's the 2 days of council meetings over the coming 2 days, and I've got to meet one of the council members at Bramber at 1:30. So what I want to talk about is one professional service and have an opportunity to have a conversation about that. I just want to remind colleagues, and particularly if you haven't been at the bigger picture where I've talked about my vision for the professional services, just to talk just a little bit about what my vision is, what I think a world-class professional service looks like. And so I'm going to do that, and we can have a dialogue about that if we want to. So I just use 4 words for this, for those who haven't heard me talk about this, and I'll just do a very summarised version. So the first word is about understand and understanding. So some of the examples I'd give for understanding is, in the Sussex context, is that students are our economic driver. So 65% of the income that comes into the university comes from tuition fees. And that's different to many of the large research-intensive institutions where much lower percentages would come in. And so what that means is students are absolutely critical to the economic model of the University of Sussex, and therefore we need to reflect on our role in supporting those. We need to understand the complexity and the uncertainty in the sector at the moment, whether that's linked to USS, so the pension scheme, whether it's linked to the Auger review, we don't know what's going to happen with the Auger review, or whether it's linked to Brexit. We know there's more uncertainty than at any time in my career in higher education. In professional services, we need to understand that the academic community are responsible for delivering the absolute key performance indicators of the institution, which are around research and around teaching. But we also need to remind ourselves that we are a professional service. We're not an administration. When I started my career, we talked about the university administration. We're a professional service. We are colleagues who have a set of professional skills that add value to the university, and we need to have confidence to demonstrate that. And then another one that is really important to understand, because there's been quite a conversation at Senate about why the university needs surpluses, is that we need surpluses to invest in the university, and particularly into our IT and our estates infrastructure, which often colleagues complain about. The second thing is we need to be flexible and open to change. And the reason we need to be flexible and open to change is the world's changing around us. So we just look at IT and the changes in the IT sector. If we look at the demands of students, they're very different from when I was a student 30 years ago. Did my 3 degrees, came away with no debt. I was delighted the academic community turned up to my lectures, and I was pleased to get my marks. But students obviously now are paying high tuition fees and have a different set of expectations. They're also different for those of you who've got young people around you in your lives. I've got a 24 and 22-year-old. Their ways of thinking are very different. And my 22-year-old talks about 18-year-olds being very different to her because they've had Facebook all their lives. So that, we just need to recognise that. One of the other things that we need to recognise is the level of compliance that is now on us compared to certainly when I started my career, whether it's GDPR, whether it's health and safety, whether it's prevent. And another reason we need to be flexible is around the amount of resource that's available to us. So a good example of that is we're going to have a really good dialogue across the institution around our IT roadmaps and our estate strategies and estates roadmap over the summer and into November. If you look at the 2 directors of IT and estates, or our previous director of estates, Simon, he would say we need to spend £500 million on the campus. Jason would argue we need to spend 80 million to be world class in IT. So if you say that's roughly 580 million, even if we achieve our expectation in surpluses to invest, we'll only have around 280 million. So we've got to work out what it is and how we invest that resource. So I think it's really, really important that as a professional service, we are both flexible and also open to change with the things that change around us. And then I think we need to deliver value and add value. So we need to demonstrate that we're efficient and effective in what we're doing and how we do that. But we also need to recognise as professional services, we add value to the organisation. So because we're professional, we're doing things that we've determined are things that we feel as a priority of the institution have been agreed. So that could be student recruitment, that could be doing work around employability, or that could be the work that's taking place in the schools to support the student experience or to support research. And then finally, I believe that if we understand our role and what we're looking to deliver, we're flexible and open to change, and we deliver value and add value, that brings confidence and allows us to celebrate the things we do. And through that confidence, we can be more efficient and effective. One of the things I wanted to just touch on is that some of the feedback I've had is that the term efficiency brings anxiety, and it makes people feel that what we're talking about is that they're going to be less staff. Now, there may or may not be less staff in the future, but the key point is that efficiency comes also from how we deliver our non-pay budgets as well as our pay budgets. And a lot of the work I've been doing since I arrived is looking at how we can be more efficient with our non-pay resource, as well as how we can be more efficient in our pay resource. And that's a conversation that is worth having. So what is it that One Professional Service is doing? Well, it's looking at how we become truly effective and efficient and integrate in the way we work. And I've talked a lot since I've arrived around single team working and what our partnership is with academic colleagues and our students, but also how each of us can develop as well and fulfill our own potential. And so I think that really what One Professional Service is looking at is how we ensure that what we're doing is both efficient and effective across the institution. And that brings some important conversations. What is the role? So most academic contracts, 20% of their contract is doing administration. What administration are they doing? And what's our responsibilities? Where's the right boundary in those responsibilities? Where are some of those areas need a full-time professional person focusing on it? So, you know, if I look at one example from my career, is I spoke to some very senior academic physicists who say, well, I don't know how to support a student getting into an accountancy firm, because many people who do physics degree end up being accountants, interestingly, and in lots of other different professions. So that's an area where maybe we need expert careers advisors providing the support. It may be different if they want to go on and have an academic career in that space. So I think these are all conversations we need to have. So the first aim is we're looking across professional services to ensure there's no duplication and that responsibilities are clear and correctly located. So there's a lot of work taking place within the central services to make sure that the boundaries are correct. So what I've done is just given one example here. So one of the things that we're doing is that our General Counsel and Governance Services is going to take responsibility holistically for compliance across the institution. So David has been responsible for information governance. We've determined that it's better to place all our compliance under single responsibility. So this is a really good example. And then what we're doing is we're going to work over the summer to make sure there's clarity for the university about where services sit. So David's team is working on a template, and all the divisions and all the school professional services will complete a template that will be available online, because one of the concerns that colleagues have had is they find it difficult to know who to contact for particular types of information. So we want to try and simplify that and make that clearer for colleagues, and we'll put that in place by September. Another bit we want to do is identify and resolve core processes that are currently frustrating many of us. And one of the things I've done here, which David is chairing, is establish a simplification and standardization user group. And as you can see from the membership, we've got broad membership from across the university, some colleagues from schools, some academic colleagues, some people who are delivering in particular areas. And David's going to tell us a little bit about what that group's looking at and what will happen going forward.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. Some of this is already written on the slide, but as a group, we've now had 3 meetings, really productive, task and finish type stuff. But actually using this as a community to identify those things which they just find difficult, they think should be easier, things that are holding people back. And I think my surprising point on this was we do lots of really big ticket items and some really exciting projects. Sometimes it's the simple stuff that people do repetitively day in, day out. And we could just make those a little bit smarter and a little bit easier for people, then we could really, really make a difference. So Tim's already spoken to a lot of work going on over our compliance processes and ensuring that they are proportionate for the degree of risk that we're carrying. So that probably covers the first 2 points on the slide. Lecture capture, there's bits here that work, bits that don't work. There's functionality that really just would make the academic, but also the student interaction with the lecture capture so much more productive and worthwhile. So we're looking into elements of that. And then simplification and standardization user group, academic misconduct, the hours people spend around some of the procedural components of this, rather than actually thinking what is correct for the student and the university, module transfer. So these are just some of the ideas that are coming up. They're things we're starting to work on. We're always open to having new ideas come in and knock around within that group. One of the lesser items which we will be putting out is almost a suggestion inbox where people can actually write to us and go, actually, I do my job, I do it really well, I love it, but if you could just do this for me, it would make it so much simpler. Why are we still doing things in the way that we're doing it? And the idea is this group becomes a test group to try and prioritise some of those elements and then provide some oversight to the solutions that we create.
So Sarah's asked a good question about UKVI compliance. So I think that the simple answer to that is no. What Bridget will do is she will chair the UK compliance group. I introduced a model here that I don't think has worked as successfully as when I introduced it in a previous place I've worked at. So actually I think there's an advantage with UKVI actually to have someone who doesn't have any of the day-to-day responsibility for delivering it. So Marcus will be responsible for UK compliance before students arrive. Jane, so Marcus as Director of Student Recruitment. Jane, again, she will be responsible for UK compliance when students are on campus. And then for staff, Sheila is responsible for them. However, what we need is a holistic single team approach to that. Again, Meryl's asked a question about CMA compliance. So I anticipate, again, Bridget will chair the CMA compliance group. The work needs to be done, and this is where I think sometimes in Sussex there's a confusion. We need to understand individual responsibilities. So in CMA compliance, it is the school's responsibility to ensure they are compliant. But what we need to do is to make sure that colleagues understand what that means and what the requirements are on them. In UKVI, again, in terms of attendance monitoring, that work takes place in schools. So I think that what we need to do is to make sure that we simplify and standardise our ways. In UKVI, attendance monitoring, one of the reasons that it's been burdensome here is because the way we write our regulations for all our students about attendance. Where I worked before, we just had 10 points of contacts, and that's how we demonstrate it. Because we've had rules originally around 80% attendance, we've got to demonstrate that's what we're doing. And I think we just need to look at our approach to these. I have a personal view on attendance. For me, from the universities I've worked in, lectures haven't been compulsory to attend. And I think we need to consider, if we've got young adults, whose responsibility is it? Now, those are decisions that aren't mine. They're for Kelly to take forward through Senate and other groups. But I think we need to think about what our approach is to those areas. So I hope that helps answer those two. What I'm not saying is that Bridget is going to be completely accountable for compliance, because that work, take health and safety, that work takes place. Every one of us has a responsibility for health and safety in the university. and depending on what our roles are, we will have different levels of responsibility. And actually, if something happens in terms of health and safety, the first thing they do when they're looking at that, if they come and have an inspection, they'll do bottom up. So they'll want to understand that where it happens, say it's in a lab, did the individuals understand what the rules were, what was expected of them? It will go up and say, well, did the university have the right process in place? But we all have a responsibility for health and safety around the campus. One of those is near misses, reporting near misses so that we can actually take action. So I hope that's helpful with that. Do keep asking questions. We find that's really helpful. So Susan. Yeah, so that's a really good question, Susan. So the whole idea of the simplification and standardization group is to allow things to come forward. Now, what is more challenging is how we make the decisions, what we're going to change. I think it was interesting talking to David, because I guess I thought at the time that things were going to come through really quickly, but we've got to balance that between what will have a real impact, and that's why having a nice balance of colleagues from the academic community, professional services, thinking through what will make a difference, and then what do we need to do to change that. So what I'm sure David will take forward the ones that are listed here. If you list bits you think are worth looking at, I'm sure David will take those.
Absolutely, really, really helpful. And it comes to mind that yes, we can do things quickly. We've done things quickly in the past. We've done things very slowly in the past. But more important that we do it correctly and it sticks. Because if we change something, we want to change it. We want to ensure that people are on board with the change and it works for everybody. So there might be a bit, obviously, it's so obvious, why don't we just do it? Well, those sort of things, yes, we need to. We just need to work through that we're doing them and they do actually land correctly for all. So, but the intent, absolutely, Susan, with you on that one.
I think one of my reflections is also the training and implementation. So it's all very well we come up with a new process or procedure centrally. It's also making sure that everyone understands what that means they need to do. And I think, and that's not for me a Sussex thing. That's very common for me in all the places I've worked. That the right level of energy doesn't go into the training and how we do that. We've done quite a lot of online training, whether it's around GDPR or Prevent. Sometimes that adds a lot of work to people, because a lot of you, maybe some of you who are on the webinar, find yourselves having to chase people to make sure that people do those things. And then what's the carrot, what's the stick? There's some good debates at ULT about, is there some carrot we can give to get people to do online training? Of course, with information governance, if we're in the commercial sector, what would happen is your computer would turn off. And I think we've got to think realistically, if we're not protecting individuals' data, what are the actions we're going to take to make sure people understand their responsibilities in that space?
If I just briefly come on to Meryl's question there about the complaints, procedures and processes, I think it's a perfect segue into the slide that Tim's just about to talk to, because I think there's an opportunity with the heads of professional service to actually work through that group about how is this best handled within the schools? Where does the role of OSCA stop and start with that process? And what can be devolved, what can be done? So it actually sits fairly and squarely with simplification and standardization, but we won't have to deal with 11, 12 individual units. We can actually work across the 4 areas of the university to think about what is the very best solution that works for not just the centre, but actually works for the schools and the academics involved in the process. So yeah, great to see it on the list.
Yeah, and so a big piece of work we're doing is then looking at the relationship between the divisions and the schools, and that's a piece of work that will work right across the coming year. So the bit that's taking place at the moment is around what each of my divisions are responsible for, and tying that down. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but my experience is you can have the following. I use an analogy of tables. You can have a table where there's overlap, so 2 tables, one on top of the other. That means that you're neither efficient or effective. What I actually find is that ends up meaning you spend quite a lot more resource, and a lot of the resource is that debating whose responsibility it is. Or you have a gap between the tables, so the worst case scenario would be a gap with health and safety. I think in part we had that. with the perceived concept that we'd outsourced health and safety. You cannot outsource your health and safety responsibilities, but I think by bringing health and safety back into the organisation and out of SEF will help bring that clarity. In an ideal world, what you have is the two tables against each other working together rather than overlapped or a gap. And I think that's pivotal. And in some of the research I've been involved in the past, in my previous role, where there's been a lot of comparator data, benchmarking data, what the research shows is it doesn't matter whether the services are out in the schools or they're located centrally. The bit that delivers efficiency is the governance, is that absolute clarity about what people's roles are, and then people being brought to account. And I always reflected when I moved from Cardiff to Manchester that one of the strengths of Cardiff was it had a very small administration, very few directors. No one was looking to get involved in other people's areas of responsibility because we were all so stretched. When you came to a university that just merged, you could find yourself having two people doing the same thing and competing for whose responsibility that was. And I think it is critical to do that. We've got another question here. So our process made more complicated. Yeah, so I think this is a really important one. Is about how colleagues can engage as we change processes, and I think we need to find the right balance here. So I think there was a good example at one of the thank you lunches I did recently where colleagues in a particular process weren't consulted, but the impact on them was enormous. And I think we need to find a way of making sure we've either got the right people in the room, or before we implement stuff, we give people the opportunity to feedback and say, well, actually, the unforeseen consequence of doing that is going to be A, B, and C. And I think we need to look at how we do that. My hope is, as PSG, as the Professional Services Group, and Professional Services Essentials develops, we can use that, because a logical way, the whole aim of the Professional Service Essentials is that we're cascading messages to every single member of the professional services staff. So each month, within 5 working days, you should be having a face-to-face meeting with your line manager, preferably in a group, talking about what's come up. Now, that's a really good way to say, well, look, these 3 new processes are being reviewed. Here is where you can go to express your views on that. One of the things we also need to accept, though, is that we're not all always going to agree, because there are different ways of doing everything. And I think the best example for this is going to be putting together the IT and the estates roadmaps. The wish list is already, if Simon was still here, is already 580 million. So that's for estates and IT. But if we've only got 280 million, we've got to make some difficult decisions. Again, in terms of delivering processes, there will be different ways of doing that. Now, for me, the way I've done it, and there's work taking place at the moment about processes around students, is that you do 2B mapping. So you do a piece of map work, you have the right people in the room, you work out what the ideal process would be, and then you see if the IT infrastructure can support doing that. But the starting point should be getting some agreement about, well, this is what we want to deliver. Now, one of the challenges with that is we also need to ensure people have capacity to do that, which is, I think, is really important. But also, the person who's ultimately accountable is in the room and is signing off that they're convinced it's the right process and they can deliver to it.
Yeah, I'd also add, and I'm not being flippant here by saying it's in the title, but when the Simplification Standardisation User Group first met, and they were talking about the principles that they wanted to apply, one of those was we shouldn't be signing off or promoting anything that makes stuff more complicated than it is at the moment. Their job very much is to help open our eyes as to the things that are working and the things that are not, and actually just make it simpler for people, not make it more complicated. So I totally recognise, and I've probably got form and skin in this as well previously on making things more complicated than they need to be. They are regularly challenging me on actually simplifying the way I think about things and helping prioritise that. So it's not going to change overnight, but I think that's a challenge we need to regularly make of ourselves in everything that we do.
So if we just move to the bit that's probably the biggest change, which is the introduction of these new roles of heads of professional service, and just talk a little bit about that. So although this may feel enormous, in every meeting and conversation I've had with heads of schools since I've arrived, I've been very transparent that I don't believe the heads of schools are the right people to line manage professional services colleagues. And I think partly that's because unlike the professional services colleagues, they're unlikely to have gone through a training process. They don't necessarily understand the work colleagues are doing, and aren't necessary in the right place to provide career development support. I know there's a mixed view about this because I've had conversations with the school administrators as well around this. But from my perspective, I think this is absolutely critical for us having a single team, a single professional service working together. So those 4 roles have gone out to advert. I think we've had 14 or so applicants for that. We're shortlisting at the moment, and the interviews will be over the next couple of weeks. And that will then, under David's line management, will allow us to look holistically at how we deliver our services. A good example of that, which I think is really important. When I first arrived on my second day, I met with Carol Watts. If we hold back on the questions for a second, because they're going to go off my screen, so I'm going to try and answer those. I'm just going to finish this one. So I've got 3 there for us to answer, which we'll go straight into in a second. So when I met with Carol, she complained that they didn't have the same level of professional services support for their students as, say, the business school has. But and she said, well, she feels there should be consistency. I support that in principle, that if we know what best practice is, so to do that, that means looking at the way we deliver professional services in a different way. That doesn't mean heads of schools shouldn't be able to have their say in having some particular type of post linked to their subject areas, but that's some of the work we're doing. I'm going to come back to this in a minute because I think it's really important to look at the questions. So we've got a question about career development opportunities. Will there be a future leader scheme or similar? Will there be a central development training budget? So this is something that Sheila's working on at the moment. She's actually working with Merrill in the business school and Moira. And what she's looking at is a competency framework across professional services. One of the things that I have probably some of the greatest concern, which I've said since I've arrived, is the career opportunities for those on lower grades and what those opportunities are. So that's a piece of work that's taking place at the moment, and we'll come out and do some consultation around that. Already, the new framework is being tested by a number of schools and some of the divisions through the appraisals process this year. So it's something I'm committed to. Of course, we've got to find ways to release resource if we're to provide those opportunities for development. So the next one is when views and ideas are expressed from staff. So the no feedback. So it's really important. So I wasn't at the conference, so I don't know what was put forward. But I think it is really important that we move forward with the ideas, or we're transparent about what we can and what we cannot do. And I think that is really important. It goes back to my point that there's going to be lots of ideas from colleagues, but we need to work out with evidence. I would argue we need to work out, what it is we want to deliver. So how do the heads of professional service roles sit with the chief technical officer? The chief technical officer is responsible for all the technical services across the university. There'll need to be some matrix work together because there's a big interrelationship between technical colleagues who do an amazing job with health and safety and with responsibilities for schools in that space. But I see technical colleagues as a single group working together in that space. So there won't be line management of the technical services colleagues. That comes through the chief technical officer. And I know, of course, there's matrix management either directly at the moment through heads of schools or through some other models. And I may not know all the models out there, and that may be something that David needs to look at over the coming year. If I just keep going through the case study, the other bit is that we've agreed that heads of schools retain their non-pay budgets. But one of the things we want to do, and we're doing a piece of work at the moment, is trying to understand different non-pay budgets. So the one that's on the top of my list at the moment is centrally the university spends £2.4 million in IT licenses. Out in the schools spend £3.7 million on IT licenses. We just need to understand is that the right balance? Are we being efficient in that? Are we considering that? Sorry, just to ask William's question, technicians are absolutely part of the professional services. So the chief technical officer is line managed by the director of estate, who's part of my leadership team. So that brings all of the professional services colleagues, but it's a different line management structure. David's focusing on one element. Our technical services have a particular responsibility which goes through the chief technical officer. So absolutely, and it's a really good example of a professional service. Our technical staff are professionals, and the ones I've met are incredibly knowledgeable in the areas that they're responsible for, and provide a particularly important service, and particularly in the science schools where the majority of our technicians are, but MFM that are reliant on them. So they are absolutely, from my perspective, part of that. We talked a little bit about opportunities and skills and career development, and then how we can be more resilient and agile range of services, so how we can be flexible and open to change. And these are things that David's looking at. And I want to emphasise, when it comes looking at efficiency and effectiveness, these new roles are being funded out of savings I've made from central services. So that's how I'm able to fund these roles. So if I give a couple of examples of efficiency, one of the things that the university's done to ensure we've got enough accommodation is we take out what are called head leases. So we lease properties off landlords in Brighton and then lease those back out to our students. There are a couple of bits about that. One, the landlords on average are charging us more than we charge the students. There's already a cost to doing that. The second thing is we had 40 plus of those rooms empty last year. So we're paying a significant amount of money. So I've reduced the number of those head leases. We had a debate, do we get rid of all 600? We thought that was too much of a risk. So we've got rid of 200 this year because we've got more accommodation coming online on East Slope. We've got another 200 we plan to, if all goes well this year, the following year. That's saving us hundreds of thousands of pounds doing that. Of course, we need to ensure our students get their space. The other one that housing colleagues have looked at that's made a significant saving for us is we rent a hotel or parts of a hotel for our study abroad students, so often for Erasmus students here for a semester. Historically, we've rented it for from September all the way through till June, July. But of course, we worked out that our students aren't there because they just come for the first semester. They're not around at Christmas. So we've renegotiated that contract. That saved us resource. So these are just examples about how we can deliver efficiencies. The other thing that we do is when I do my budget with each of my team, they all have to come forward with 10% savings each year, and then they can bid back. And through that process, each of my directors have come forward with ideas about how they can deliver efficiencies. And some of that may be not replacing staff when staff have left, but a lot of it is in their non-pay budgets. So they're good examples. David, did you want to say?
If I can just expand a little bit on the skills and career development, because that is particularly important for me within this whole approach, and one of the things I've been exploring with prospective candidates for the roles. So when we look across the school-based professional services at the moment, the opportunities for people to progress are few and far between. So we might have 65, 70 research staff embedded across a number of schools. How do we actually gauge them and think about their development of their career as people either undertaking or supporting research? And actually, how do we move them from between schools and the centre, and even out with the university to then come back further on in their careers? Is something that we absolutely want to major on and try and remove the boundaries that feel as though they're there at the moment. They shouldn't be there, but for some reason they are. I think the other opportunity, and people that know me well enough will not be surprised to hear me say this, we have an awful lot of working groups, initiatives and things happening around the university. The opportunity to look down within the school resource for those professional services staff and how we can actually get those people involved and actually representing, not just representing the schools, but representing the subject things that they work on. So that might be timetabling. I might be introducing a process that people think is overly complicated. Actually having people that might be grades 4, 5, 6, the people who are actually doing these jobs day in, day out, sat on our working groups, rather than just the same old faces at quite a senior level, sat centrally working out what is right, can only be a good thing, but also provides a fantastic development opportunity for those individuals to get involved in things outside of their day job, which has to be able to help their careers.
So one of the questions there is what happens to the work that is left when you do not replace a role? Well, impossible for me to answer because it's colleagues coming forward and saying, I don't think we need this role anymore. The key bit should be that either the work's being redistributed or we're stopping doing stuff, and that is one of the one of the challenges in universities is, and throughout my career, whenever we say we need to stop doing stuff, we find it very hard to identify what we're going to stop doing. But that's how that's how it should happen.
I think I have a go at the next question, because obviously one of these directors that Tim asks me regularly to find my 10% savings. I can understand the nervousness, but there's an open dialogue, and actually it's talking about the impact of those savings. And we all have turnover within our teams as the year goes on, and actually there's peaks and troughs in the work that we do. So I've got a very small team, and if I were to lose one or two people through that time and not being able to replace them, that would have a fundamental impact. But actually, in the 2 years that we've been running this exercise, I've never actually felt that process. It does require us to be more flexible and adaptive, and it's a little bit to the point that Tim had on his previous slide around resilience, where we actually need to build that into how we work. People have specific roles, but they also have specific skills, and those skills can be deployed in other ways to actually bridge some of these gaps. So yes, it's an open dialogue. Essential roles are essential roles. Ultimately, we've got to support both our students and our staff to deliver the academic endeavours of the university, and we need to do whatever that takes.
Just to add to that, Sam, so our costs are going up year on year, and yet the tuition fees are stable. So something has to give if we're going to invest in the estate. So we have to, and it's a responsibility of the directors to manage their resources efficiently and effectively. And I won't be doing my job if I'm not challenging each of my directors on how they're spending those resources, and I do that regularly. And that's a critical part of my role, as it is for Saul as provost line managing the schools. We've got to demonstrate the efficiency and effectiveness. The challenge is if we don't do that. I'll just give you one example. We need a new network across the campus. The last time we did that was 17 years ago. The estimate to put in the new fibre optics across this campus is £20 million. That's what our surpluses go into investing in, and so of course, if we can generate more resources, that's fantastic, and that provides those opportunities. But even if we generate more resources, we still need a difficult conversation about: do we want to invest those resources in staff, or do we want to invest those resources in our estate, in our infrastructure? Because the demands of both our students and staff, as we know, go up all the time. And I don't think I've met anyone since I've been here who feels the estate's in perfect order, and definitely not the IT. And Jason has a great vision for that. But as David says, is what colleagues have is they have to come forward with a proposal how they would make 10% savings if they have to, but they also have the opportunity to bid back. Now, a different way of doing this, which I've worked in an organisation that's done this, is zero-based budgeting. And I found that really consuming of time. What that does is each year you have to justify every penny you're going to spend. So in the advance, so what you normally do is in, say, March of each year, you would go, right, I start with a blank sheet of paper. This is what I need to deliver what I'm being asked to do for next year. I think that is more onerous, and from my experience causes more anxiety of teams than just being completely transparent. And actually, if you look at my first year when we under-recruited students, we had to make in-year savings. And in-year savings are much, much more challenging than making savings through a planned process. So I think it's really important year on year we challenge ourselves. But I do recognise in all my career in universities, people aren't, we're not good, I include myself, we're not good at stopping stuff and making those difficult decisions. And even when we make a decision to stop stuff, it has quite a long lead-in time to do that. So, we're just reviewing our approach to widening participation. But it will take, because we have to submit through the Office for Students our approach to this, it will take 2 or 3 years to feed through. Changing our scholarships approach takes 2 or 3 years to feed through. So what's next? So we're going to continue the work looking to remove duplication, provide greater clarity of responsibilities over the next 12 months. And one of the things that I didn't finish articulating is we're looking at how the divisions work with schools. So at one end, you've got say general counsel. So if you look at general counsel, they're a central service, and schools can access them, and so can the other divisions. You've then got a pool of services that work through a partnering model. So HR and finance being the best examples. Estates and IT are looking at what that means for them. And then you've got the more thematic structure. So if you take students or you take research and enterprise, those are activities that run all the way through the vein of the institution. So we need to decide what is the role of academics, what's the role of professional services, and then when it's the role of professional services, where is the resource located? Now, I believe we need warmth in the schools. And I know that's woolly language, but I believe that students should be able to go into their schools, recognise staff, have conversations there. So we need to work out what the balance is with a new student centre. What's in the student centre? What happens in schools? Where's their duplication for that activity? So I think that's an important conversation. David's work will continue around the standardisation simplification user group, and we'll look at what we focus on. Obviously, we're doing the recruitment process for the heads of professional services, and then we want to do more and more of this. So I think it's really important, the openness and transparency about what we're doing. So I think Kirsty, it's the same question. In some schools, there's a head of technical services. How does this sit with the heads of professional services roles within those schools? So I think I'm not going to try and answer that because I've got a model that I understand in my head, but I think it's one that Stephen, as the Chief Technical Officer, Steve Johnson, and David just need to look at that relationship. What we know is there's core activities to do in both areas. So I think rather than answering that here, I think it's one to take away. And I know that Steve's producing a paper to come to the next One Professional Services Board. So just so colleagues are aware, there is a formal governance board which has 3 heads of schools on it, has the Director of Finance, David, myself, and that's the group that looks. So, for example, when we're looking at all the non-paid budgets, we're bringing that forward to that group to debate which areas do we need to look at, because capacity obviously is a challenge as well.
And I can add the same would be true for the finance business partners, the HR business partners, and I think when we've got the heads of professional service in role, I'm very much they need to be part of the conversation about their roles, because they ultimately will be accountable to the heads of schools for the delivery of the services. So they need to work with professional services colleagues to understand exactly how that's going to work. So, and I don't want to necessarily design that and tell them what they need to do. I want them to be part of that conversation. I think there's a question above it.
Oh, sorry. How do we
only
become
it's
more
too
agile
close to my heart
when there are so many? How do we become more agile when there are too many committees and working groups? Yes, well, actually, that's a debate taking place at UEG at the moment, and I absolutely agree. Where's the right balance? And we were having a debate about all the actions that take place. So I think we have to work through accountability. There's a fine balance here between using committees, working groups, and how they consult and making decisions. And I think that's a tension that's quite strong in Sussex, because quite often what happens is we come up with a solution, and actually we're told it either hasn't been consulted or it's the wrong solution. So I think that's one we need to keep working with. I'm going to try and keep going through, because there's quite a lot coming in. I'm not sure I completely understand the difference between the new standardisation group and the old remit of the SART project. I thought part of the intention of SART was to reduce duplication of process simplify things. Yeah, absolutely.
It has to.
Yeah, and it has looked to do that, particularly through the service delivery work that Sarah Hardman's been involved from the beginning. What we're trying to do now is to look holistically, because we're looking at HR, we're looking at finance, we're looking at the student side, and with a group we're trying to identify the most important bits. Obviously, each time we develop a new system, so we've got a business case in at the moment around an HR, an IT solution, a digital solution for HR. Then we need to look at all of those processes. So I think that that's really important. So that they're linked is my simple answer, and we need to determine who take each bit forward. Am I able to update on the planned restructuring of the Student Experience Division, which being told will take place in September? Adam's committed to have a three-way meeting with Kelly, Jane and myself about the structure around the student experience. I've seen nothing since Adam said he committed to do that, but I know Kelly and Jane are working on the structure, so I don't know the timelines of that, but I'm sure, Sarah, as soon as there's more information about that, it'll be communicated.
Andy, your point, wholeheartedly agree. And Alan, Ian McKee and others are looking at procurement. It will play into the example Tim described earlier on with IT. I think that's a very good example, but systematically we are working through just where we spend our money, and is it in the most effective way. We might have 3 contracts with the same supplier in 3 separate places at the moment, and they're all university-wide contracts. So they're not all as extreme as that, but there is plenty of opportunity. It comes back to Tim's earlier point about efficiency. This isn't all about stuff. We can work smarter, but there are just so many areas where we're just not spending our money smart as well, and it's about being efficient with how we spend money.
And I think in your space, Andy, I think you've given me some examples, or someone has from there. I think lab gloves is an example where we're going out to different suppliers. We've got large. I mean, for me, my background's retailing. Just in time delivery can save us resource. There are all sorts of models there, and I think that we need to put our energy into those. I think that's really important. So let's just keep doing the questions. I'm conscious that in theory I've got another 4 minutes before shooting down to Bramber. So the timelines are quite close to planned information. It's currently impossible to plan for the counselling service to start the academic year. Some users would be greatly appreciated. Well, all I can do with that is take that back to Jane and feed that back in. So I'm hearing again from Sonia as well. So we'll feed that back in and commit to find out what the timeline is. So I recognise the importance about that. What I'm saying is I don't know. That doesn't mean So that doesn't mean there isn't a timeline. Not surprisingly, there'll be quite a lot of things I don't know about what's happening in a large number of my areas. But what I'll do is commit to ask that question. And to see where we are in that, in that space, and I'm sure I can do that quite quickly. So I'll make that commitment to you. I can see there are people typing, so we're just going to wait for those. Sam, is there a question there? You talk about So what I'm giving there is just the. That's exactly what I'm saying. My point is there may be confusion with individual academics about what their responsibility is and what our responsibility is. So in my previous role, we did a lot of work in terms of identifying what was expected of the academic community in terms of students' careers and where they could direct people otherwise. So of course I recognise we have the experience here. What we don't know is whether in all cases they're being pushed across there, and it could be a bad example. The boundaries between for some of the colleagues there, I know some of the colleagues are out there. If you look at mental health, again I'll go back with anecdotal experience. When I was an academic, I had a student come to my room at 6 o'clock at night who'd gone through some horrific experiences with 2 very close family members passing away within 2 weeks. I had no training. I had no knowledge what I should do with that individual other than I knew you had to listen. So if an academic has that same experience, what do they understand they should do? When should they transfer? Across. So it's just making sure that people understand the boundaries and the support they've got. And I'm making no judgments in this of what's going on out there because I just won't know the detail. But I think there being clarity is absolutely critical in this, and that people know what they do in certain circumstances. Now, again, my experience would also be expect the unexpected. So you can't predict what's going to happen, but at least having some understanding, I think is really, really important in that boundary bit. So I think, thanks. I really appreciate everyone's been very open with all the questions we've had. I apologise that I've got to finish a little bit earlier. It's just I've got to shoot down to Bramber. But I do hope many of you get the opportunity to join the big picture, and we can keep the dialogue. And what I'll try and do is actually, I've got colleagues here who'll have a record of all the questions. And what we'll try and do is think about those questions and what more feedback we can give before or at the big picture. And what I remain absolutely committed to do is to keep talking to colleagues, about what's going on in the professional services and one professional service. And just to finish, thanking all the colleagues out there for all your hard work over this academic year. I know it's near the end because it's the last council meeting of the cycle, and it's one of the things that it's a rhythm that I'm not used to in all my previous roles. But each council cycle runs to a term, so the fact it's council today and tomorrow means we must be coming near to the end of this term. So for those I don't see, I hope you all also get a fantastic break at some time over the summer. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.